Hello everyone and welcome to the third official webinar of Sci Sports. Today we're going to talk about our brand new future, the player roles. My name is Jacco Slot, head of football at Sci Sport. Next to me,
Jan van Haaien, head of data analytics at Sci Sports.
And as mentioned before, we're going to talk about player roles, our brand new functionality. Good to see that more than 300 people requested themselves for this webinar. Normally it will take us 45 minutes to go through the whole webinar. So let's start. If there are any questions, please ask them at the end of the session. We will give as much answers as possible to the questions you have. If we cannot answer the question during this live session, we will answer your question by email. So don't hesitate to ask your questions to us. So again, welcome. As mentioned, we're going to talk about how can you scout players based on your team's tactical plan. You see the tactical plan of Ajax of this season. You already see some player roles we predefined. And of course, today you're going to learn everything about how do we come to player types like inside forward, wide playmaker, or advanced playmaker. Again, my name is Jacco Slot. Today we do the presentation with Jan van Haaien and one of our data scouts, Stefan Huiskes. Stefan will go through Insight today. He's working with clubs like Genk, Ajax, but also helped the Belgian national team during their World Cup campaign last year in the summer. First of all, I want to say congratulations to some of our clients because they had some massive achievements during this season. Union Berlin and Paderborn, they got promoted to the Bundesliga. Good job. Congratulations. Of course, Genk and Ajax, both champion of their league. Ajax also won the Dutch Cup, and KV Mechelen, they won the Belgium Cup, and they got promoted to the highest level of Belgian football. So a big congratulations to all of them from the Sci Sports team. Talk about a bit about our history, our journey so far. For who are we working and how do we work together? These are is a selection of some of the clients we are working for. Some clubs you already saw, which we congratulate today. But what they have in common, they work with data intelligence in their scouting process. And why do they use data intelligence process? At the end, they all want to find the best and most realistic players for them available. They want to have coverage in countries where they don't have presence. Of course, as a club, you want to validate tips from football experts because we know that clubs get lots of tips each day from all kinds of football experts. You cannot check them all in platforms like Scout or Instat. So therefore, use data intelligence, use a platform like ours to validate all those tips you get and decide, are you going to follow them by live scouting, yes or no? At the end, there are lots of football professionals who have good opinion about the quality of a player, but it's mainly subjective information. We say use objective information as well to get a full overview on the quality of a player, which you might be interested in. Support investment or transfer decisions. Your board is expecting from you a good advice on, do we want to sign a player, yes or no? Make sure that that advice is not only subjective, but also objective with reports based on data as well. And of course, at the end, you try to save time and money by making your process as effective as possible. How do we see a data-driven scouting approach? How do we see a data-driven scouting process? At the end, you see here video scouting, live scouting, still very important, but we say make sure that before you start with your video scouting, you set up your data parameters in a good and efficient way. Because again, lots of tips each day from agents. Let data help you to validate those tips. Also, we see it as a trend, and that's why we have this webinar today, that clubs, they are looking for example, a similar type like Hakim Ziyech, but affordable for my budget and good enough to play at my level. And it doesn't matter if you play Premier League, Keukenkampioen Divisie, or second Bundesliga, you're looking for a type like Hakim Ziyech, which you can afford. Use data there to make sure that you get 5 or 10 or 20 names on your list, and the next step will always be video scouting or live scouting. And the third main challenge or task as a scouting or recruitment department is you want to know everything that is going on in certain regions, and therefore it's impossible to have knowledge of all regions all around the world. Some clubs do have good network in certain regions, but we always say use data to make sure that you know everything what's going on, and did you know which regions or country might be interesting for you to follow with your video scouting or with your live scouting. Data can help you in an efficient way by setting up your data filters to make sure that you get a good list in this phase where you can go to the video or live scouting. At the end, you come to the second stage or the end stage, and again, you have a list of maybe 5 or 3 players in which you say, okay, we totally scouted them. We are convinced that those 2, 3, or 4 players are a good signing for us as a club. But again, use data there to get as much information about a personality as possible. So check the personality of a player based on data which you can find from him, but also give objective opinion about you're going to replace maybe a certain player in your team. Is this player which we scouted a similar type of player like the player we are going to sell? Your scouts can tell you yes based on what they saw with your eyes, but let data help you as well, and combine those 2 worlds to get a good overview and make your decision to sign a player, yes or no. That's actually how we see the data-driven scouting approach. And again, in this webinar, we're going to talk about the player roles, but before we go to the player roles, short update on the size scale, because that's actually, in our opinion, the first step. Always make sure that you find players who are good enough to play for you, and therefore use our size scale, because with our size scale, you can easily see what is the current quality of a player and what is the potential of a player. Here you see the career path of Kevin De Bruyne. You see 2 lines, orange and blue. The orange one means what is the current level of Kevin De Bruyne on a certain age, and the blue line is what is the potential. So how good do we expect that Kevin De Bruyne will be in the future? And then you see already when he was playing at Genk, his orange line was that he was a top player in the Pro League in Belgium. But we already say, okay, De Bruyne has the potential to be at a size scale of 120 or even more. And you see here that's top Premier League. So even though he was only 19 years old, our system, our size scale already said Kevin De Bruyne is a wonder kid. And you also see the development he made at an early stage of his career. So it's also really interesting to use insight to make sure you see some trends, especially on young players. You see massive development, and those players you need to check with your eyes, you need to check with video scouting. That's actually how you can use the size scale to get a quick and good overview on current quality, potential, and development, to make sure that you have those players on the list who are good to play for you as a club. But the second question will always be, does this player fit to my tactical plan? Because a trainer, a technical director, they have their own philosophy of playing, and one is playing with a box-to-box midfielder, the other one is wanting to play with a ball-winning midfielder. Similar roles in the team, but completely different player roles in how they should perform on the pitch. So please make sure that you find some player roles which match to my tactical plan. That's a trend what we see, and therefore we made our brand new player roles model. An example here is from Sam Lammers, Luc de Jong, and Casper Dolberg. You see directly the size scale values, which I explained earlier, but you also see 3 completely different type of players, because Luc de Jong in this example is in our model a target man. That we named him as 1 here doesn't mean that he's the best target man of all, but he's used to play as a target man, and he isn't used to play in other roles. And if you compare it, for example, with Casper Dolberg, he's used to play as a mobile striker or a poacher based on the events, but Jan is going to explain more about it. He is taking on the pitch. And Sam Lammers, you see, he can play as a target man. He sometimes play there, and he also is used to play in a role like a shadow striker. So with this information, we now know 1, is a player good enough to play for your club? 2, what's his potential? And 3, in what role is he used to play at his current team where he's playing for? Again, in the theory, Jan is going to explain, and Stefan is going to show you how we implemented this model inside our online platform. Other example is here, Manuel Neuer. We predefined him as a ball-playing keeper with his size, skill, and potential. And you see directly that, for example, Julian Pollersbeck from Hamburger SV, he's not as good as Manuel Neuer based on his size scale, but you see that his similarity score is 98%. So he's close to the style of playing like Manuel Neuer. And if you're looking for a replacement for Neuer or a similar type of player than Manuel Neuer, these players together with Ortega or Donnarumma, complete other level, these three players might be interesting for you to check with your eyes and see if they are matching your profile with your eyes as well. Other example here is Jadon Sancho. We all know him. He's predefined as mainly as a classic winger, but he plays in multiple roles, so also as an inside forward and a wide playmaker. These three players are actually players in which we say, okay, they are younger than 21 years old. They have the potential to be better than 100. And at the end, they have a similarity score here from 97, 96, and 96 as well. So again, a good and easy way to find similar players, like players you like, and check those players afterwards with your eyes. Next small thing I want to talk about, because that's actually the topic for our next webinar, those are the contribution ratings, because we get questions all the time. Okay, can you also show me why is a player so good in a certain role? Yes, we can. We're currently working out this model. Our data scouts, Stefan, can already deliver some first results, but I'll share already some results here. And you see Hakim Ziyech, this is our portal inside, which Stefan will explain later on. But you see, okay, what's the value of all the attacking actions of Hakim Ziyech? You see he has the highest value of all players in the Dutch Eredivisie and on the same position as Hakim Ziyech. So we benchmark on league and on position, and you see the extreme value Hakim Ziyech has based on all his attacking actions. So not only shots, passes, but a combination of all the attacking events Hakim Ziyech is taking in the Eredivisie. Same for Daley Blind, even though he's a defender, you see he's a league on his own. If you look at a central defender, predefined as a ball-playing defender, and we filtered him on his passing value, and you see he's a league of his own. If you compare him to other players in the Dutch Eredivisie who are central defenders, Blind has by far the highest value if it comes down to his passing game. But that's a sneak preview into what we're going to do as a next step. Next webinar, again, we will explain more about this one. Now we go back to the player roles, and Stefan will give a live demo on how you can use our player roles on a daily basis with our portal inside. Therefore, I'm going to change the screen to inside. Yeah, and Stefan, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Jaco. First of all, my name is Stefan. I'm a data scout at SciSports, and the data scout is the middleman between scouts, technical directors, and the analytics part of the club. In this demo, I will show you how you can use on an efficient way the player roles, one of the new features in our Insight platform. Now, what you see on this screen is the landing page, and when I go to the Play Store button, you see all the several features of Insight. And in this case, I will show you and explain how you can search for interesting players based on the player roles. First of all, in the first case, we will check the role of Robert Lewandowski. He made a massive good performance last weekend. And when we go to his profile, you see his main role is a poacher, which you could identify it as a top finisher. And yeah, a typical striker who has a really good finishing skills and so on. When I scroll down, you see here the size skill graph of Lewandowski, and I will show his player roles. When I click on the button of the player roles, you can see the description of what is a poacher, but also what we see is that Lewandowski has the player role as a mobile striker, and that is a kind of space invader on the of one of his offensive skills. Also, you see here some players who have a similar role, and this is just based on players who are currently playing in the same league as Lewandowski. When I click on the Find More button, we go to our dashboard with all the players in the database. I will just zoom a little bit in. So we can see all the players who have a similar role like Lewandowski in our database. Now, when I click on the right, we see at the end the similarity score of Lewandowski. Now, when we are searching for a replacement of Lewandowski, we are talking about a top level competition and top level league. So in this case, the size skill potential of on 100. And as you can see, some top youngsters are popping up. Also, I will like to search only players until the age of 23. And you can see there are, in this case, 16 players with a similar role like Lewandowski and has a size skill potential which is higher or equal as 100. So amongst others, names like Dembele, Kasper Dolberg, and also Tammy Abraham and Benfica youngster João Felix are popping up. In the second case, I will use the similar button in the search bar. I did already here put in the name of Lewandowski, but now I'm looking directly for similar players like, in this case, Alexander Arnold. Everybody knows his magnificent corner kick from a couple of weeks ago. And in this case, we are looking only for players who are playing on the back position and are from 14 years until 21 years old. Now, as Jacco already mentioned, we can also fill in a size skill level. Now, in this case, we're searching for a mid-table club in a European league. And as you can see, there are some unexpected or less famous names are popping up, but also names like Diego Dalot from Manchester United. The third case, we are looking for a more advanced role, and in this case, we will do it on the hand of Dani Parejo. When we look at his player role, we identified him as a deep-lying midfielder who can move the ball from the back line to the front. And as you already see, there are some defensive playmakers who are popping up, names like Marco Verratti, Harry Winks, but also Frankie de Jong, who will move to Barcelona. The last case I will show is based on our shadow team feature. With the shadow team feature, you can add your own team and show what influence has a new player to your team. In this case, I will do it for the new season for Bayern Munich. So I'm going to the wizard and search for Bayern Munich and set my desired formation in a 4, 2, 3, 1. At this moment, all the players of the selection of Bayern Munich are shown up in the field. And now you can see, based on the size scale, Bayern has currently most of all the players have a higher size scale than the average of the league. Also, you can see a size scale potential team. So all the size scale potential scorers of the teams will show. Now, in this case, we will search for a replacement of Arjen Robben and Frank Ribéry, who will leave the club in the upcoming summer. So after I drag and drop down Robben and Ribéry in the starting lineup, I can search for a type player like Arjen Robben, and we are looking for some new upcoming talents who have a similar role like Arjen Robben had in last summer or last season. We are also searching for a top level team. So again, we set up the potential higher than 100, and we will only search for players who could play on the right or left wing position. Now there are some names are popping up, and we can also save these players. And in this case, I will save Chiesa Kluivert and Samuel Chukwueze and put them into my shortlist. With the shortlist, you can save players, you can make interesting shortlists based on several competitions. Now, in this case, replacement for Robben. I created this shortlist, and now I will save these players in the shortlist. Afterwards, we can go back to the shadow team I already saved in the platform, Munich 2019-2020, and I will drag and drop my players with a similar role like Robben into the team. Now, in this case, Chiesa also played on the left wing position, and Chukwueze is more playing on the right wing position. And you can see directly what is the influence of these new players based on the size scale potential of the team, but also based on the current size scale. And as you already could see, the current size scale of Chukwueze is lower compared to the league average of the Bundesliga. So these are 3 cases which are part of the online training program the data scouts provide to clubs and clients. Jan will tell more about the theory about player roles, and afterwards we will go to the Q&A.
All right, thank you very much for the introduction, Stefan. As the head of data analytics at SciSports, I'll talk you through some of the technical underpinnings of the player roles functionality in the Insight platform. In particular, I will address the question, how do we assign player roles to football players? And to answer this question, I will answer or try to answer 4 more concrete underlying questions. So the first question is, which player roles exist in modern football? The second question is, what are the expectations for each player role? The third question is, who are prototypical players for each player role? And finally, the fourth question is, and also the most important question is, how well does a player fit each of these player roles? So the first question is, which player roles exist in modern football? To answer this question, we closely collaborated with the football experts within the company, and more specifically, the data scouting department. We talked to several football coaches and football scouts. We also consulted the literature, as well as the popular Football Manager video game. Well, based on this analysis, we arrived at 22 different player roles across 6 different positions. So for goalkeepers, we identified the line keeper, the ball playing keeper, and the sweeper keeper. For central defenders, we identified the stopper, the ball winning defender, and the ball playing defender. For backs, we identified the defensive back, the inverted wing back, and the wing back. For central midfielders, we identified 5 different roles: the holding midfielder, the ball winning midfielder, the box-to-box midfielder, the deep lying playmaker, and the advanced playmaker. And for wingers, we identified the classic winger, the inside forward, and the wide playmaker. And finally, for the center forwards, we identified the mobile striker, the poacher, the pressing forward, shadow striker, and the target man. And once we had identified these 22 different player roles, the next question was, what are the expectations for each player role? So more specifically, when a player is tasked with a particular role, which tasks and duties is he expected to perform during a match? So for each of the 22 player roles, we identified a set of primary tasks and secondary tasks. And in this presentation, I'll briefly cover the 3 primary tasks for 3 winger roles and for 3 forward roles. So the first forward role is the target man. He's expected to hold on to the ball, allowing teammates to connect, and he's also expected to attempt headed shots and engage in aerial duels. The second forward role is the pressing forward, who is also expected to hold on to the ball, but also to press the defensive line of the opposition and to take on opponents. And the third player role I'd like to cover is the mobile striker, who is expected to advance the ball through the center of the pitch, to attempt shots from fast transitions, and also to combine with teammates in confined spaces. Similarly, the first winger role is a classic winger, who is expected to advance the ball down the flank, to provide width to the team, and also to cross the ball from the flanks into the penalty area. The second winger role is the inside forward, who is expected to advance the ball through the middle of the pitch, to also attempt shots from fast transitions, and to attempt long-range shots. And finally, the third winger role I'd like to cover is the wide playmaker, who is expected to create goal-scoring chances for fellow teammates, the game somewhat higher up the pitch, and also to combine with teammates in confined spaces. And these examples already show one of the major challenges we're faced with. On the one hand, we need to identify tasks and duties that characterize each of these player roles. On the other hand, we also need to identify tasks and duties that help us distinguish between them. So, both within a position as well as across different positions. So, for instance, the target man and the pressing forward share the task of holding on to the ball, whereas the mobile striker and the wide playmaker share the task of attempting to combine with teammates in confined spaces. So once we've defined these player roles and also identified the prototypical tasks and duties for each of the player roles, we also needed some prototypical players for each of the player roles in order to train the models we used. So for this, we also consulted our data scouting department, and they were so kind to label almost 2,000 players with their most appropriate player role. So for instance, Jan Vertongen is a prototypical example of a ball-playing defender. He rates like 95% on the ball-playing defender role and much lower on all of the other roles. Similarly, Frankie de Jong is a deep-lying playmaker, and Sergio Aguero is a mobile striker. So once we had identified the roles and underlying tasks, as well as had collected the different prototypes, we used all this information to train a machine learning model. So we analyzed large amounts of match event data to train a model that assigns a player role rating for each of the roles to each player who played at least 700 minutes throughout the season. And using this machine learning model, we can actually produce a player role rating for each of the 22 different player roles. So, for instance, the slide shows the player role fingerprint for Hakim Ziyech, and it shows that the wide playmaker player role is the primary role for Hakim Ziyech. So using our machine learning model, reproduce these fingerprints, as Stefan already demonstrated during the demo, for over 20,000 different players. And using these, fingerprints, we can also power the functionality in the platform to easily retrieve similar players in terms of playing style. So, for instance, if you have a look at the player profile of Hakim Ziyech, which we consider a reference player here, we get to see the following four most similar players in terms of player roles. And unsurprisingly, one of the players, Vaclav Černý, who played the majority of his games for the youth team of Ajax, pops up as the most similar player in terms of playing style. Quite likely because he's tasked with similar tasks and duties during the games. Yeah, and that's everything I wanted to tell you about the technicalities about the player roles functionality inside. I think it's now time to head into the Q&A. So if you still have any questions, feel free to send them to us through the platform.
Thanks, Jan. We know it's quite some information we are giving in a short period. So if you have any questions, please ask them. If you want to see more from inside, please send us an email to info@SciSports, and we can give you entrance to the portal inside. Also, if you want to talk to our data scout Stefan, that he helps you to explain how to find some players, it is possible to go in a one-on-one session with Stefan, where he can explain you how inside works. So therefore, go to our website www.scisports.com. You can ask for a free trial or send us an email to info@scisports.com. Let's go to some questions we had, and therefore I'm going to try to put the camera back on. So maybe, Jan, do we already have some questions as people can see us again?
Yeah, we do. So the first question is for me, apparently. So the question is, what happens if player roles change over time? Are playing roles defined per season or for a whole career? Right now, player roles are always based on the matches a player played throughout the past 8 months. So it's all pretty much season-based at this point. So when someone starts playing a different position, it will take a while before this also becomes visible in the player role fingerprint.
Okay, one of the questions is, how many players do we have in our database? We have approximately 90,000 players in our database. From how many players do we have the player roles? Yeah, as Jan mentioned already, we need event data. So I think, Jan, almost 25,000, 30,000?
At this point, yeah, it's approximately 25,000 different players.
Yeah, so when there's no event data available worldwide, we cannot calculate the player roles. But if we have the event data, we can calculate the player roles. So for the size scale, we don't use event data. That's why we have more players in our database with a size scale and a size scale potential than our player roles. Maybe, Jan, to answer a question, how do we come to the potential of a player? Can you explain a bit on how we calculate size scale potential?
Yeah, size scale potential is mostly based on the developments of similar players who are somewhat older already. So, for a given player, we look for similar players in terms of development, and then we can project their expected development into the future.
Okay, very good.
Okay, second question then. Also for me, question is, what metrics are used to determine the level of similarity? So this is something I try to briefly cover at the end of my presentation. So, for each of the players, we end up with like 22 player role ratings. So we rate each player on each role, and then we compute the similarity between these 22 ratings. So if the player role ratings for 2 players are identical, you'll get like a 100% similarity. If they're completely different, you'll get like a 0% similarity. So essentially, the similarity score tells you like how well the player role ratings for individual players correspond to each other.
Maybe on the question, which I often hear as well, is sometimes you see a player in inside with 70% one role, 75% the other role, 65% another role, so not really an expert on what role. How should you interpret that? Because sometimes the player is not for 90% just one role, but for a lower.
Yeah, exactly. So this often happens with players who play like or fulfill different roles throughout the season. The player role ratings essentially tell you like how often a player played in a particular role. So having like a slightly lower rating for a particular player role doesn't necessarily mean a player is not capable of fulfilling their role. It probably more shows his versatility rather than not being able to fulfill a particular role.
Okay, one of the questions is it only for high-level players? So like Premier League or Bundesliga? No, we don't only have the player roles for those competitions. As mentioned before, when there's event data available, we have the player roles available, but we can hand out an overview of the leagues which we cover with our player roles. So again, send us an email and we can answer that question as well. Question about CF Cerny example, maybe.
Yeah. So questions as follows: as the CF Cerny example shows, player role is also based on the club philosophy, and the manager is that taken into account. So right now, that's not being taken into account explicitly, although it's certainly accounted for implicitly. So in the end, we compute over 500 different statistics for players in matches based on the match event data we have at our disposal. And then we compile these statistics into player role ratings, as I showed before. Although we try to account for differences in playing style, and there certainly is some implicit information about a club's playing style in these statistics.
Yeah, that's also one of the questions. Does it mean when a player is 98% that he's by far the best in that role? No, he's used to playing that role. Again, in our next webinar, we will explain more about contribution ratings, because with the contribution ratings, you can see why is a player so good in his role. So up till now, we're just saying this player is used to play in a certain role, which gives you good information. Next question would be, how good is he in that role? You can say something about it with the size scale already, but the next step will certainly be the contribution ratings as well. We're skipping through questions, lots of questions, so that's why we sometimes need to check the computer on the left side as well to check which questions are there. Jan, did you find?
Yeah, so there's one more related question to the previous question. So the question is as follows: what data points are most important in deciding what type of forward a player is? So the answer is also a bit similar. We compute like a whole array of statistics about players. We also asked our data scouts to label players for us, and based on the domain knowledge they share with us, we could actually automatically identify by analyzing the data which of these statistics was most important to characterize the different forward roles, but also to distinguish between them. So as I also showed in the presentation, some of these roles have tasks and duties in common, so you cannot really use those tasks and duties to distinguish between different player roles, but they also have some differences. So we need statistics that both capture the similarities and the differences between different player roles for a particular position.
Okay, how deep is our information on South America players? I'm checking to the right side of me, Stefan.
Yeah, we covered a lot of countries, I think. Most of the countries in South America, we have the size scale, but also the player roles. Yeah. So especially Ecuador, Colombia, and some other competitions.
When age of player data available, yeah, totally depends again on if there's data available. I mean, when a player is 16 years old and plays in a competition which isn't being covered by, for example, Y-Scout, yeah, then we don't have the data from that player as well. So we normally have the rule that when a player is in a portal like Y-Scout, he will be in our database as well, and otherwise there's just no data available. And when there's no data available, we cannot say anything about his size scale or about his player roles. The rule is mainly that a player needs to play 10 matches, depends on the amount of minutes he plays, to get a size skill and a size skill potential. So that totally depends on the amount of minutes a player is playing during those 10 games. So sometimes it's 12 games, other times it's 10 games, I think.
Yeah, true. Probably it's also good to mention here that the match event data we rely on for the more advanced features in the platform, like the player roles, which we showed today, the contribution ratings we'll be talking about later. Well, this type of data is becoming like increasingly available for also youth leagues, for instance. So the data collection companies and also our partner Scout is like increasingly collecting data about youth players. So I expect in the future we'll be able to cover players from a younger age as well.
Yeah. That's why we had the webinar last time about ball games. Our philosophy is quite simple: the better the quality of data, the more insights we can give to clubs, and therefore we started the Ball James projects, and we're currently doing some live demos in the Heracles Stadium as well. So if you want to join the match at the Heracles Stadium, please let us know to see what we're doing with Ball James as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's one more question about data. The question is pretty short. How do you collect the data? So already briefly touched upon that. We collaborate with Scout, who collect like so-called match event data for a large number of competitions worldwide. We use their data, and we also try to enrich it in clever ways. Okay, we're quickly browsing through some other questions. Maybe we can.
Maybe one or two more, Jan. Did you see?
Yeah, so this one we already covered. The question is, where do you get the event level data from, which is Scout, which we collaborate with. And then maybe the next question we can also still address in the webinar. So the question is as follows: in developing the player roles, is there some measure incorporated that relates to the riskiness of the player? For example, pass success rate. So can you differentiate between a pressing forward that makes a lot of risky passes and a pressing forward that makes mostly safe passes? So as I mentioned earlier, we compute like a large number of different statistics about players. And here the challenge is to distinguish between like the quantity of events and the quality of events. So on the one hand, one player can perform a certain action many times, while another player can perform this action fewer times. And on the other hand, like one player can perform actions of higher quality, whereas the other one can perform actions of lower quality. So that's also one of the challenges we need to address when assigning player roles to players. But this is also something we'll briefly, or at least touch upon during the next webinar when we'll cover contribution ratings.
Maybe the last question I see popping up here. Let's check. Player development. It's good to see that all questions are for you, Jan. That's also good to see. Huh?
Well, the question is as follows: how do you measure player development? Is it improvement in some base stats over multiple seasons? It's not entirely clear to me whether this is about the player roles or the size skill again.
I guess the size skill, because we mentioned it about the 6 months development with the Kevin De Bruyne sheet.
Yeah, so essentially what the size skill index measures is the impact that a player has on the performances of his team. So before each team, we actually make a prediction about how well we expect the player to perform during that game. Then after the game, we observe the actual performance of the player, and based on the difference between the expected performance before the game and the actual performance in the game, we tune the size skill value. So if a player consistently performs better than we expect this player to perform beforehand, then the size skill value goes up. Otherwise, the value remains the same or goes down. So for size skill index, we use relatively basic information, which we typically call match sheet data. The primary reason for that is that we want to cover as many players as possible. So currently, we're covering like 90,000 players with size skill, whereas we can only cover 25,000 players for player roles at this point, because the more detailed match event data is not available for all these players yet.
Okay, I see people get nervous, Jan, because we're running out of time. 45 minutes. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want to have a trial, you can see a button in your screen. ask for a free trial and try Insight for yourself. There's a lot of information in Insight. If you have questions, again, it's possible to book a Skype call or whatsoever with one of the data scouts. They are happy to help you to go through Insight and make sure that you get the answers to the questions you have, because Jan learned me, it's all about asking yourself the good questions. What questions does data need to answer you? If you have that clear, you can find your answers in Insight. That's actually what
entirely true. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a good thing. Thanks again from Stefan, Jan as well, and I'd like to see you again in our next webinar about contribution ratings. Thanks.
Okay, bye.